It's a celebration of America's freedom. Welcome to the Marc Discusses Show. The Marc Discusses Show is your place for a weekly discussion on making America great again. The important political and legal issues of the day, a celebration of the Constitution, and traditional American values. Marc is a practicing attorney, a former senatorial candidate, a Donald J. Trump-endorsed delegate, and a defender of the Constitution. His goal? To put America first. And now, celebrating America's freedoms, here's attorney Marc Discusses.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the Marc Discusses Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And welcome to my listeners here on WHP 580 and iHeartRadio. And remember, you can download the iHeartRadio app and listen to the show wherever you are, whenever you like. I'm down here in Deer Lake in western Maryland, and so I'm coming at you remotely. This area is just rampant with deer and other wildlife, including bear. So if you hear any loud growling noises and the phone gets disconnected, well, you'll know what happened. If you'd like to listen to some prior podcasts of this show, if you'd like to read weekly columns on Penn Live, the one is up today, where I talk about Joe Biden's poor debate performance, or to take a look at some great merchandise, check out our website at themarcscurrenshow.com. Going to follow me on at Marc Discusses on July 4th. The President of the United States addressed the nation from the National Mall in Washington, D.C. The President offered stirring remarks that celebrated the greatness of America. It's a wonderful change from what we hear every day from candidates and from the President's predecessor, Barack, the President, who so obviously and honestly loves America and all that she stands for. And I, for one, am happy. I don't know about you. I'm happy to see that, contrary to the predictions of some Democrats and members, the President's 4th of July celebration did not end up with the President riding a tank at the helm of a tank, German tank, at the military conference. None of that happened. We were able to have the tanks down there at the National Memorial without any military coup by the President. So congratulations to the administration. Defeat. Well, of course, Democratic candidates for president carped and criticized our president for his patriotic 4th of July celebration. Former Vice President Joe Biden, the 2020 Democratic primary, not so much front runner anymore. I wonder what Donald Trump will say this evening. Designed more to stroke his ego than celebrate American peoples. So we're to celebrate the birthday of our nation by appearing at the 4th of July celebration. He wants to speak to America. He's the and he delivers a beautiful address that is not about politics. It's all about the people of our country and telling us why America is great, why we are celebrating our birthday, and of course Democrats have to condemn him for doing so. But that seems par for the course. Gillibrand, New York, she fired away at the president, telling reporters that the event was a waste of money. You know, he's having a parade for himself, putting tanks out there for himself. If he really cares about the men and women of our nation, he would be investing in higher pay, better housing, better health care. So there is a United States senator making the 4th of July celebration about politics, complaining that the president should be talking about higher pay, better housing, and better health care. But before we talk more about the president's speech, let's just talk a little bit about what Gillibrand criticized the president for. Is he not investing in higher pay? Well, first of all, a strong majority of payers, tax center estimate, less taxes under the Trump tax law, and only 6% pay more. Little change to their taxes. 5% of American taxpayers receiving a net pay increase under Trump. That increase because more of the pay. Yes, Gillibrand, the president is investing in higher pay. And by the way, since Trump took office, wages have increased about 2.4%, much higher than the wage increases in the 8 years of Barack Obama. In June, wages ticked up they're up 3.1% for hourly workers over the past 12 months. That's a nice wage increase. So there's the president investing in higher pay and employment at the year lows. How about June's job report? 224,000 new jobs in June. Well, that's 224,000 Americans who went from being jobless to having a job. United States Senator Kamala Harris, she joined in. She claimed that in the first in the first Democratic presidential primary debate, remember when she said, well, yeah, people in America are working. They're working 2 or 3 jobs. Well, the fact checkers looked into that, and it turns out that only about 5% of working Americans are holding multiple jobs. That is a very low number. So Kamala Harris's attack on the president's glowing job numbers and is revitalizing our economy, getting more people back to work and thus higher pay is very misleading story that she told. And how about Senator Gillibrand talking about better housing and better health care? You know, I thought we had the best health care under Obama-Biden care. I thought that issue was resolved by the Democrats. I thought we all had better health care. Well, according to PBS, about 44 million people in this country have no health insurance, and another 38 million have inadequate health insurance, even though we have Obama-Biden care. This means that about nearly 1/3 of Americans each day face each day without having health insurance. But what about Obama-Biden care? So Gillibrand is criticizing President Trump on not providing more health insurance to Americans, despite the fact that tens of millions of Americans lost their health insurance under Obama-Biden care. And how about Representative Tulsi Gabbard? You know, I had some respect for her after her performance in the first Democratic presidential debate, where she really took it to both parties for their foreign policy that was really not in the national interest of the United States, but this kind of liberal progressive foreign policy about dictators and monsters. But when she speaks at the National Mall, she's saying that the president was dishonoring our troops, dishonoring service members and veterans. Really, Representative Gabbard? We'll talk more about the president's 4th of July speech and some criticism he sustained from Democratic presidential candidates. When we return from this brief commercial break, you're listening to The Marc Discusses Show.
Now, more of Marc Discusses on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Marc Discusses Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. We're coming to you this afternoon remotely from Deer Lake in western Maryland. And thank you for tuning in to WHP 580 and iHeartRadio. We're talking about President Trump's 4th of July celebration and how he was able to pull it off despite all of the carping and criticism from the media and Democratic presidential candidates. Representative Tulsi Gabbard, she criticized the president, saying the event dishonors our troops, dishonors our service members and veterans, because it's really all about Trump. It's not about our service members. It's not about their sacrifices. It's not about my brothers and sisters who lost their lives in service to this country. And that's the most unfortunate thing. That's what Tulsi Gabbard said. She's a Democratic presidential candidate, a congresswoman from Hawaii. But is she right? I don't think so. President Trump spoke beautifully about our troops, about the honor of their service, about their sacrifice. What is Representative Gabbard talking about? Trump loves the troops. That's all he talks about. Listen to what he said during the speech. President Trump said, on this July 4th, we pay special tribute to the military service members who laid down their lives for our nation. We are deeply moved to be in the presence this evening of Gold Star families whose loved ones made the supreme sacrifice. Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. Throughout our history, our country has been made ever greater by citizens who risked it all for equality and justice. Those are beautiful words from the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, about the sacrifice made by our men and women in uniform. So Representative Tulsi Gabbard took a big swing and a miss on this criticism and really is left with egg all over her face. Just about so much of that speech was in honor of our servicemen and women. So that one really fell flat. Now, some of the media have criticized the president because the speech sounded more like a history lesson, but I think that is probably long overdue for the American people to hear about the founding of our country, its purpose, its principles, its values, as articulated by those who actually created America, our founding fathers. And President Trump spoke beautifully about that great time period, the birth of our nation. After all, it was our birthday on July 4th, and the president's talking about the day we were born. It's entirely appropriate that the president speak about those issues. He said, on this day, 243 years ago, our founding fathers pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to declare independence and defend our God-given rights. Thomas Jefferson wrote the words that forever changed the course of humanity. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. With a single sheet of parchment and 56 signatures, America began the greatest political journey in human history. The British had come to crush the revolution in its infancy. Washington's message to his troops laid bare the stakes. He wrote, "The fate of unborn millions will now depend under God on the courage and conduct of this army. We have, therefore, to resolve to conquer or die." Days later, General Washington ordered that the Declaration of Independence be read aloud to the troops. The assembled soldiers just joined an excited crowd running down Broadway. They toppled a statue of King George and melted it in bullets for battle. The faraway king would soon learn a timeless lesson about the people of this majestic land. Americans love our freedom, and no one will ever take it away from us. That same American spirit that emboldened our founders has kept us strong throughout our history. To this day, that spirit runs through the veins of every American patriot. It lives on in each and every one of you here today. It is the spirit of daring and defiance, excellence and adventure, courage and confidence, loyalty and love that built this country in the most exceptional nation in the history of the world, and our nation is stronger today than it has ever before. It is its strongest now. That same righteous American spirit forged our glorious Constitution. That rugged American character led the legendary explorers on their perilous expedition across an untamed continent. It drove others to journey west and stake out their claim on the wild frontier. Devotion to our founding ideals led American patriots to abolish the evil of slavery, secure civil rights, and expand the blessings of liberty to all Americans. This is the noble purpose that inspired Abraham Lincoln to rededicate our nation to a new birth of freedom, and to resolve that we will always have a government of, by, and for the people. Our quest for greatness unleashed a culture of discovery that led Thomas Edison to imagine his light bulb, Alexander Graham Bell to create the telephone, the Wright brothers to look to the sky and see the next great frontier. For Americans, nothing is impossible. And the president continued. But I thought those were beautiful words describing what it is to be an American. Those are truly remarkable lines that need to be spoken by presidents time and time again to remind us of what it is to be an American. And I want to give a little bit of an analysis on if we are truly living up to the ideals of our founding and what it means to be an American. The president said on the 4th of July that Americans love their freedom, and no one will ever take it from them. But that poses the question, do all Americans love their freedom? Freedom from intervention from the government, freedom from dependence on the government, right? Isn't that the ideal of an American, the rugged individualist that makes his own way through life, is not dependent upon the beneficence or the largesse or generosity of the sovereign? In our case, it's not a king, it's our fellow taxpayers through our Republican form of government. But aren't most Americans today dependent upon government? About 61 million Americans collect Social Security each month. In one out of four families, someone is receiving Social Security. It pays about $1 trillion in benefits to Americans yearly. 44 million Americans are on Medicare, and that number will rise to 79 million by 2030. Medicaid covers 75 million Americans. 1 in 5 Americans receive health care coverage through Medicaid. About 40 million Americans are on food stamps, and millions of Americans receive federal housing, rental assistance, Section 8 housing, subsidized mortgage loans through the FHA, the VA, and the USDA. The federal government now owns Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac mortgage loans owner. And mortgages of the overwhelming are now guaranteed by the federal government. Nearly 2 million Americans are currently receiving unemployment compensation benefits. 21% of Americans participate in at least one government assistance program. The United States are enrolled in one or more government welfare programs. 40% of children under the age of 18 participated in some form of government assistance. A female-led household participated in a form of government assistance. So do Americans love and defend their freedom from government intrusion, intervention, and also government dependence? And I regret to say that the statistics are overwhelming, that in today's America, so many Americans are choosing dependence upon government rather than independence and dependence upon their own hard work, their own skills, their own knowledge, their own savings, and their own desire to make their way through life based upon their own individual initiative. And I think that the president, perhaps in his next address, could focus on these issues, because America is bankrupt. America, the national debt is over $20 trillion. We have 30 trillion unfunded liabilities to Social Security and Medicare. We have over $1 trillion in tuition debt. So much of the American ideals of individualism, self-reliance, and personal responsibility, which are the ideals and values of our founding, so much of that has been lost in today's America. And I think that's the message that we need to get this country back to. You know, I remember running for the Republican nomination to the U.S. Senate back in 2012, and I was kind of swept into it by the Tea Party movement and their calls for self-reliance, personal responsibility, and individualism, the principles of our founding. And I remember going to Tea Party rally after Tea Party rally, and I remember coming upon a gentleman, a Tea Party activist and advocate, and at one point I was talking about the reforms we need to make to Social Security, and his immediate response was, "Hands off my Social Security." And I thought, oh boy, this doesn't really sound like the founding principles of America. And the president talked on July 4th about that rugged American character that led the legendary explorers Lewis and Clark on that perilous expedition across an untamed continent. But do we still have that rugged American character anymore? And that, I think, is the fundamental question, or one of the fundamental questions confronting the American people today. I would love for a political candidate, or a politician in office, whether it's the president of the United States or a governor or a United States senator, to contrast those ideals of our founding to how so many Americans are living their lives today, and see if some beneficial policy changes can result from a renewed understanding, an awakening perhaps, of what it really means to be an American. We'll talk more about the president's 4th of July speech, and we'll talk about the 2020 Democratic presidential contest when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to the Marc Discusses Show.
Let's get back to the Marc Discusses Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Marc Discusses Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. And today we're talking about the president's address to the nation during the July 4th celebration on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. But we're also talking about the 2020 Democratic presidential primary contest. That, of course, was continuing to roll forward despite the president's address to the nation. We've talked about some criticism Democratic presidential candidates have leveled on the president, on President Trump, for deciding to address the nation at the July 4th celebration. And we also discussed on last week's show the first Democratic presidential debate when United States Senator Kamala Harris, Democrat from California, landed a devastating punch right on the chin of former Vice President Joe Biden. And remember when Harris called out Biden for lauding his work with segregationist senators and his work in the United States Senate opposing forced busing to integrate public schools. Well, that issue, that kind of argument between those two as to what would have been the right thing for Joe Biden to do back then is continuing to spill over in the 2020 Democratic presidential contest. But that back during that first presidential debate, you knew that Biden had no chance in this debate with Harris over busing, or at least I knew it. He was a strong opponent of forced busing in the 1970s. He was defending the concerns of white suburban constituents who were outraged by a court order requiring forced busing. White suburban children would be bused into inner-city Wilmington schools, and inner-city black children would be bused into the white suburban schools, according to the court order by a federal district court in Wilmington, Delaware. And that's what Joe Biden was fighting against back in the early and mid-1970s. Now, today he tries to paint a different picture of what he was doing back then. And in recent years, the Democratic Party has moved far to the left, leaving centrists like Joe Biden not only without support, but stunned to be on the receiving end of those same false charges of racism that Biden used to so freely deliver and level upon Republicans. Remember Joe Biden during the 2012 presidential reelection effort when he was speaking, I believe it was in South Carolina, to a largely black audience, and Joe Biden, the then vice president of the United States, saying Republicans and Mitt Romney wanted to put you all back in chains. Remember, he dropped into that Southern accent. I guess he was mimicking one of his good friends, one of his segregationist senators who he worked with to oppose forced busing to keep black children out of schools in the white suburbs of Wilmington. The irony of Joe Biden is remarkable to this day, and it's remarkable to me that the media are not really calling him out on this. That seems to me to be a failure of the media, but we'll have to figure out why it is that they're doing that. Or are they trying to prop up Joe Biden because they think he's the most viable candidate to defeat President Trump in the fall? That's a possibility. And so perhaps that's why they're not jumping all over Biden. for his huge problem that he has on his past history of working with segregationist senators to oppose the efforts of liberal progressives of that day to end segregation, de facto segregation, and to bring about the integration of blacks and whites. That seems to me to be one of the main goals of many liberal progressive groups in America today, as it was back in the 70s. And Joe Biden was against them in the 70s on a huge issue. Forced busing was a big issue in the mid-70s and late 70s. And it's as I say, it's just, I can't believe that the media is not jumping all over Biden for his work with white segregationist senators to stop forced busing. In any event, Biden learned in real time during that first Democratic presidential debate that I don't think a white man can win an argument about race with a black woman, Kamala Harris, who was holding a giant race card. And I wrote about this debate over busing in my most recent column, which you can check out on Penn Live. Now, I predicted in that column that Biden will soon renounce his past opposition to busing and racial quotas, and I said that he'll do this in a vain attempt to hang on to his lead among black Democratic primary voters. And I said all that will do is speed up the day of his ultimate political demise. Now, time will tell if my prediction comes true, but I will say in the days and week following the Democratic presidential debate, Biden has pretty much stood his ground on that issue. Now, he's, of course, obfuscating what it is that he was actually against. He's lying about his actual record, but he hasn't kind of thrown in the towel, and he hasn't come out in favor of forced busing and forced government sponsoring racial integration and racial quotas. So we'll see if my prediction turns out to be true or not. But the former vice president certainly suffered some real political fallout as a result of his widely criticized poor debate performance, in particular against Kamala Harris on the issue of busing. President Trump dismissed Joe Biden as a reclamation project earlier today in a tweet. The president tweeted, "Joe Biden is a reclamation project. Some things are just not salvageable." President Trump tweeted from his golf club in Bedminster, New Jersey today. So we'll see. I think that Biden will last a bit longer. But as I say, I'm not so sure he's going to survive in this left of center Democratic presidential primary contest when you have some very smart and articulate and engaging candidates like Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, who seem to be rising to the top of the pack. And those candidates are telling Democratic voters on the left, which generate with enthusiasm and energy in a Democratic primary, they're telling those voters what they want to hear. Now, in a recent CNN poll that was released after the debates, Biden dropped 10 percentage points from the last poll of its kind in May. And post-debate polls vaulted Harris into the top tier now with Biden, Bernie Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren. A former Obama administration official, Van Jones, said on CNN that Biden's not ready to go head-to-head with Donald Trump or really anybody. Senator Kamala Harris took in roughly $12 million in the second quarter, placing her fundraising behind Joe Biden and South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg. So this is a surge in fundraising for Kamala Harris, and it's enabled her to hire about 35 additional staffers in Iowa in recent days, and that brings up her total number of staffers in Iowa to 65. So Kamala Harris now has one of the largest teams on the ground in Iowa. So Kamala Harris is surging, and Joe Biden is suffering. We'll see if he is salvageable or not. The president doesn't believe he is. But then Joe Biden, in an effort of damage control, went on CNN with Chris Cuomo And Cuomo is, of course, a liberal Democrat, the brother of the governor of New York, the son of the former governor of New York, famous liberal Democratic family. So, of course, he's a journalist and member of the media. And Cuomo gave a real softball interview of Biden, attempting to resuscitate him. But Biden did damage to himself again. And you have to Google the CNN interview with Chris Cuomo, where Joe Biden claims that Russia would not dare to interfere in a U.S. election on his watch. Now, here's what Biden said. While Putin's trying to undo our elections, he's actually undoing elections in Europe. You think that would happen on my watch, on Barack's watch? You can't answer that, but I promise you it wouldn't have, and it didn't. Stop the press. Former Vice President Joe Biden is saying that Vladimir Putin and the Russians did not interfere in the U.S. elections under the Obama-Biden watch. He's saying it didn't happen. Biden's flipped his lid. For 2.5 years, for 3 years, liberals, Democrats, the media, and Joe Biden have been saying the Russians attempted to interfere in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. And Biden and his fellow Democrats and the media were condemning President Donald Trump for trying to downplay that. But here we have Joe Biden saying the Russians would never attempt to interfere in U.S. elections when he was vice president, and in fact, they didn't. I mean, that is demonstrably false. It's patently false. I mean, it's absolutely shocking to me that Chris Cuomo, a purported journalist, would not have said, whoa, wait a second, Mr. Former Vice President, you have just reversed course on about 1 million statements by you, your fellow Democrats in Congress and elsewhere that the Russians had in fact attempted to interfere in U.S. presidential elections. It's striking to me, and I wonder, and that's why I'm thinking, are our liberal Democratic friends in the media trying to protect Joe? Are they trying to keep Joe in this presidential race? We'll talk more about the 2020 Democratic presidential primary contest when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Marc Discusses Show.
Now back to The Marc Discusses Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to The Marc Discusses Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. We're talking about President Trump's speech to the nation on the July 4th celebrations on the National Mall, and we're also getting into the 2020 Democratic presidential debate, and I'm talking about Kamala Harris landing a strong punch on the chin of Joe Biden in attacking and criticizing him for lauding the segregationist senators that he worked with back in the day, and for Biden's express and avowed contempt for busing. Biden's on record saying busing is an asinine policy. It's a racist policy. And he strongly and vigorously opposed the court-ordered forced busing in Wilmington, Delaware in the mid-'70s. But now, and Biden's claimed in his 2007 autobiography, he talked about going into town hall meetings with his white suburban constituents who were outraged by the forced busing court order, and how Biden quickly championed their cause and strongly and strenuously opposed the forced busing that had been ordered by a federal district court. Now, Biden is saying something very different about his opposition to forced busing. Now, in this interview with Chris Cuomo on CNN that occurred after Biden's disastrous performance in the first presidential debate, where Cuomo is attempting to kind of resurrect the failing Joe Biden, and Cuomo is giving him some softball questions. Joe Biden states in the interview that the Russians would never attempt to interfere in a U.S. presidential election under the administration of Barack Obama and Joe Biden, thus contradicting about 3 years of statements from Joe Biden, every Democratic member of Congress or elected official, and every member of the media that the Russians, in fact, interfered in the 2016 presidential elections under President Barack Obama and Vice President Joe Biden. So just a complete, strange, disconnected, illogical statement by Joe Biden. Doesn't even get any pushback from Chris Cuomo. And now Cuomo gives him an opportunity to do some more damage control on his poor debate performance with Kamala Harris. And I swear this is going to be the last time, well, maybe not, that I talk about this forced busing issue and Joe Biden's involvement in it, because it's just the epitome of hypocrisy that the media is just letting this go. So here's what Joe Biden said to Chris Cuomo. He said, "I was prepared for them to come after me." He's talking about the attack from Kamala Harris. "But I wasn't prepared for the person coming at me the way she came out. She knew Bo and me." Now, Bo is Joe's deceased son, who was a Delaware attorney general, and so he must have worked with Kamala Harris when she was attorney general of California. And Joe Biden continues, "It's so easy to go back 30, 40, 50 years, and you take a context," I don't know what that means, but then he says, "and take it completely out of context. Busing did not work." Now here he says, and listen to this, "You had overwhelming response from the African-American community in my state. My state is the 8th largest black population in the country as a percentage of population. They did not support it." Wow. Joe Biden is saying that busing failed because African Americans, blacks in his state, did not support busing. Now, that is a demonstrably false statement to make. Biden is already on record saying he opposed forced busing because the majority of his overwhelmingly white suburban constituents opposed it. The children who were the plaintiffs in the lawsuit were young black students. They were supported by organizations that advanced the rights of black Americans. And Biden is saying, the African Americans didn't want busing. I mean, what is he talking about? And again, no pushback from Chris Cuomo, the CNN alleged journalist. It's just, Biden then told Cuomo, what we should be debating, what we do from here. So Biden's saying he doesn't want to talk about his past record. He doesn't want his past record to be a subject of the campaign. He just wants to debate what we do in America moving forward. Yet so much of what Joe Biden talks about on the campaign trail and on the debate stage is his 8 years as vice president to Barack Obama and all the purportedly wonderful things they did for the country then, and his decades and decades-long experience in the United States Senate. Just about all the man talks about is his history and his record. Yet he tells Chris Cuomo on CNN, no, we shouldn't be debating about what we did in the past. We should only be debating about what we do from here. No pushback from Cuomo. It leads to the conclusion that the media are clearly protecting Joe. Anyway, the fallout from this interchange between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden on the busing issue, as I say, has continued, and it continues to be a part of the Democratic presidential primary contest on Independence Day. At a backyard fundraiser, Kamala Harris said, "I've asked him and have yet to hear him agree that busing that was court-ordered and mandated in most places and in that era in which I was bused was necessary. He has yet to agree that his position on this, which was to work with segregationists and oppose busing, was wrong." And here Kamala Harris is right on point. She's saying when local school districts failed to integrate the schools, that required government intervention through a federal court or a federal agency if the integration or the desegregation wasn't occurring at the local level. That's what Kamala Harris is saying was necessary, and that's what happened in Wilmington. And the court in Wilmington issued and ruled in favor of the court-ordered busing, because the court declared the school district was complicit in segregation, which is why the court had to step in. In any event, that debate continues to move forward through the presidential Democratic primary debates. It continues to have consequences. Today, both Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are campaigning in North Carolina, where the black vote is critical to the success of any Democratic candidate. And Joe Biden, and let me just give you a response that was reported today. A Marguerite Willis, who was a recent Democratic candidate for governor of North Carolina, she responded to a question posed by a reporter about Joe Biden. And Ms. Willis said, "My view on it is that Joe Biden has had his day. He's a good man. I don't think he's a racist, personally, but I think that many people can beat Donald Trump. And I don't think we have to have necessarily an old white guy to do it." And so that's the dilemma that Joe Biden is now in. And Joe Biden came into this primary election leading among black voters in the Democratic Party, and he has a strong base of support with black voters. And perhaps it's because of his 8 years with Barack Obama, who is, of course, beloved by black Americans and so many other Americans, for that matter. And perhaps that kind of the magic of the Obama charisma and likability has rubbed off on Joe Biden, and perhaps that's why he does so well with blacks, and he's still doing well. But, push is coming to shove, and you have some outstanding candidates. Of course, I oppose everything they stand for, but I'm talking about they're smart, they're dynamic, they're energetic, they can deliver. I'm talking about Kamala Harris and Cory Booker. And you also have Julian Castro, Hispanic American. So you have some real up-and-comers in the Democratic Party who are delivering the red meat, so to speak, to the base of the Democratic Party that has moved to the left. And there's not much of a center anymore in the Democratic Party. Why? Well, for a long time, the Democratic Party has shifted to the left on the social and cultural issues now. And we have Donald Trump as the head of the Republican Party and the president of the United States. And Trump went right after those blue-collar Democratic voters in Pittsburgh and Scranton and Erie and Johnstown and in the Rust Belt states. Those were hardcore, lifelong Democrats in the vein of FDR and John Kennedy. But they weren't really social liberals. They were more conservative on the social issues. And as their party went further to the left on the social and cultural issues, it started to leave them without a national leaders advocating for them on those issues. And then when Trump took up the mantle of an American first policy on trade and immigration, he got so much support from the blue-collar Democrats that Joe Biden is praying will come back to him. So Trump has taken out a large swath of the Democratic primary voter base by advocating America first on trade and immigration. You think about the blue-collar Democratic workers in the steel mills of Pittsburgh and the coal mines of the coal region in northeastern Pennsylvania. They were voting Democrat since their grandparents voted for Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But they switched and they voted for Trump because Trump is defending their jobs, their energy-dependent jobs, their manufacturing jobs. He's defending them through his tariffs and through his tough talk and tough renegotiations of these trade deals that have sent so many of their jobs overseas during prior presidential administrations. So Trump's got them. Trump has a significant percentage of those blue-collar Democratic voters. that's Joe Biden's natural constituency, but it may not be there for him in a general election against Trump. So all of these people, all of these forecasters and prognosticators who are saying that Joe Biden is the one candidate among all the Democratic primary candidates who is viable and can beat Donald Trump in the fall, I would say not so fast. Now, Biden is not running to the left. He hasn't done that yet. He's trying to make himself more palatable to the center, to moderates, and to those blue-collar Democratic voters, but not against Donald Trump. I would say yes against a George W. Bush or a Jeb Bush or a Marco Rubio, who are all about free trade and open borders and all of that stuff. But you don't get that from Trump. You get the opposite. So I'm not so sure about this obvious media ploy to protect Joe Biden from these horrible gaps that he's made in the early days of the Democratic primary nomination on forced busing, and then his patently false assertion that the Russians wouldn't attempt to interfere in our elections in 2012. I don't think that's the way it's going to shape out. So I want to thank you for listening to the Marc Discusses Show today, and tune in every Saturday at 1 o'clock on WHP 580 to hear the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.